Okay, welcome to Cinelit, your regular monthly podcast about films and filmmakers. We are back again. It's back to a duo of me and Daryl. Say hello, Daryl.
Hello, Daryl. Yeah, nice to be back again.
Yeah, so after a few weeks of differing guests, differing hosts, we are back to the core of me and Daryl this week. So
it's the real deal. Yeah, yeah.
It's the real deal, people. Yeah, unfiltered Daryl and Adam. So we decided we were knocking on different subject matters, and we noticed that Bill Murray was turning 70 this month. So we thought we cannot avoid talking about Bill Murray. Not that we would require much arm twisting to talk about Bill Murray, but here we are. We're going to talk about Bill Murray's long career in film.
How is Bill Murray 70?
It's nuts, isn't it? It just feels like he's like, I don't know. It just feels like he's permanently middle-aged grumpy man sort of look, and that sort of like disheveled, slightly bored, slightly odd figure that he cuts in films like Quick Change and those films. And that he feels like he's always going to be that, and he doesn't look that much different now. So we're on Bill Murray. What were your thoughts on Bill Murray? Are you a fan?
I've grown into a fan over the years. I must admit he took a bit of getting used to for me, but as time's passed and as his film roles have developed, I've become a confirmed fan, and I've gone back to those early films again. I like a lot of those a lot more than I used to.
I guess, I obviously I grew up, Ghostbusters was such a big part of my childhood that he was always there. With one movie after another, But so I guess my generation, he's always been that guy, and then now he's developed into a little urban legend kind of character, isn't he? Where everyone loves Bill Murray. How can you not love Bill Murray?
Sure.
But let's go back to the beginnings of Bill Murray. Let's go back to the early days. So we're going to look at his first raft of movies that he did early, pre-Ghostbusters, really, when he was probably trying to find his path in filmmaking, mainly with collaborations with Harold Ramis, who would obviously play a big role in his post Ghostbusters career. But his early collaborations with Harold Ramis on films like Stripes, films like Meatballs, Caddyshack.
He was coming out of Saturday Night Live at this point. He'd been part of that team, and that sort of means a lot nowadays. But to British audiences, we didn't get to see Saturday Night Live. History sort of tells us, there's this huge comedy show in the States, and all of this great talent came out of it. We sort of didn't know at the time, and we were only getting to see sort of John Belushi, Chevy Chase, Dan Aykroyd, Eddie Murphy a little bit later through the movies that came over here. And we'd sort of got these vague murmurs that, they're from this American comedy show. But we never ever got to see it, unlike now where everything's available to everyone, And so Murray, we learned about through the films that you've mentioned there, Adam. And they came bang, 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 one after the other into British cinemas and on the shelves of video stores. If you went to the comedy section of your video rental shop in sort of 1980, 81, there'd be all these Bill Murray titles lined up, and everyone, there were hits on rental, Caddyshack especially, I think. Again, you've got a little Bill Murray career in microcosm there with those early films, because he's sort of dipping in and doing cameos in some of the films. He's taken the lead role in others. He's sort of in maybe a secondary part that he builds up into a lead in some of the films, and he sort of continued to do that all through his career, as we'll discuss during the day. But as we say, primarily known for comedy and for TV comedy, so he breaks into the movies. And the big three early on are the ones you've mentioned there: Meatballs, Caddyshack, and Stripes with Ivan Reitman, I think. Great in all of them, really sort of steals the show in all of them, although I think there's a case for saying that Rodney Dangerfield has a damn good go in Caddyshack.
I think they're both trying to steal the show from Chevy Chase in that one, really. I think it's an interesting one. But there's a nice little dynamic, because Bill Murray wasn't in the original cast of Saturday Night Live. He came on in the second season when Chevy Chase left. Yeah. And he kind of replaced Chevy Chase as that guy, and then here he is practically stealing the movie Caddyshack away from Chase a couple of years later.
Yeah, I mean, Caddyshack's interesting because it's a chance there for Murray. He's almost in a little film of his own in that movie. He's playing the assistant greenskeeper at the golf club where all the action's set, and there's this whole sort of plot going on surrounding Chevy Chase and Rodney Dangerfield and so on. And Bill Murray, you keep cutting away to these scenes of him and these little animatronic puppet gophers that he's trying to get rid of. And it's like a little movie all on its own, interspersed within the main action. So, yeah, he's got his own little showcase there. And it all sort of diverges together at the end.
He really does elevate that character way beyond, I think, the original intention, to the point where it's the one people are reminded of and is sorely missed from Caddyshack 2.
Yeah. And you know, I get the impression that part and the in the editing of that film, you do wonder if they sort of thought, oh, we've really got something here. Let's build this up and make it a real showcase, you know, because it could have been with any other actor, you know, that could have been just simple cutaways, you know, quick fire gags and so on, and then back to the main action. And here we sort of go away for minutes at a time and sort of focus on what Bill's doing and what the gophers are doing, you know, and it does make this little parallel story within the story, you know, and he really does make the most of what could have been an absolute nothing part there.
And I think also it helps with that period of time where there was a lot of US teen sex comedies that were coming out around that period.
Yeah.
And this could have easily been another one of those.
Sure.
Beefing up that role and having Rodney Dangerfield in it in a bit more of a scenery chewing cameo, a small role. It really moved it away from being put into that ghetto of Last American Virgin, Porky's, those kind of types of films.
I think you can say the same about Meatballs as well, because that's got summer camp setting, you know, and very, very similar to some of the horror films that were coming out at the same time, like Friday the 13th. Again, summer camp is not something that we really knew much about in England, but we learned about it through American movies. And then here's this comedy film coming out, and Bill Murray's in it again, this name that we've heard about, you know, and again he steals the show. And again, that's another film that could have easily become a Porky's clone or something, or Last American Virgin clone, and it isn't. You know, Murray again drags that up by the bootstraps and sort of makes it into something else, and turns it into a very sort of heartwarming story by the end, which is extraordinary given the setup.
Do you think it's maybe more of the Canadian influence there? Because Meatballs, there's a lot of Canadians working on that. Maybe that the slight shift of sentiment, shift of mentality on making that kind of movie from Canada to America is maybe not as easy as we initially thought. It's actually they approached it a slightly different way.
Could be. And of course, the other thing there is that there's absolutely no harm in selling your film as though it's a sex comedy, getting everyone to pay their money or their video rental or whatever. And then by the time they find out it's not Porky's 3 or whatever, they've enjoyed the movie anyway for what it is. So there's certainly no harm in mis-selling the film. That's been happening since day one in Hollywood, you know, and I think maybe the Canadians did tone it down a little bit. I think the film, for what it is great. You know, it works very well. It's funny. Murray again steals the show. He's doing a lot of the sort of comedy shtick, but he's also involved in the sort of central core story as well. So you know, he's the sort of character with a heart, really, as well as being the cynic. He sort of manages to straddle the two. And again, I think that's something he sort of continued through his career. You know, I think he'd see himself as being a very sort of cynical, very sort of abrasive sort of comedian, but he fits perfectly into more romantic or more sort of the gentle sort of roles, and his great skill over the decades has been sort of balancing those two, I think, often in the same movie, and he's still doing that right up to today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he has that undeniable charm, I think, which you can't
And you've
really
got that
cover up that
character
well.
right there from the start. Yeah,
Absolutely. Are you talking about how in this country we didn't get Saturday Night Live, but we got the movies? I'm assuming the Ruttles was a bigger hit over here than it was in America with Eric Idle and Neil Innes, and obviously Bill Murray has a small cameo in that, so maybe that was the first appearance on our shows.
I'd forgotten that. That would have been the first time I ever saw him. Yeah, and the Ruttles was big over here. I mean, I bought the album and everything, and but we didn't know much about where the Ruttles had come from, other than it had been made by Eric Idle, who everybody knew from Python.
Yeah.
So it's only in later years that you learned all about the sort of American comedy connections and everything, and gave it a bit of context as to where it actually arisen from. But I think Eric Idle was enough to sort of sell it over here on his own, and that's how it was sort of seen in Britain. That's reminded me that would have been the first time that I ever saw Bill Murray without having a clue who he was.
So Bill's doing these movies throughout this period, and he's jumping like he would do in his later career. He's jumping between comedies, but he's also taking on slightly more serious roles as well.
Already at this stage,
I think it's one of those ones where comedians probably realise that there's a shelf life for most comedic actors. There's a shelf life, and then if you don't move into more dramatic roles, potentially your career will not be as long as it should be. You think about like Tom Hanks being one of the most famous of those examples where he moved out of comedy entirely almost.
But even the likes of Steve Martin and Jim Carrey have sort of dabbled in that, and I think they've always been known as comic actors, but every now and then they'll do a sort of dramatic part or something that's a little bit more of a stretch.
Yeah.
And it's something that all comics feel the need to do. I think Bill Murray's made a career out of that, really, almost at the point now where he is a dramatic actor who occasionally dips back into comedy.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. So in this early period, we've got appearances in, it's still a comedy, but like Tootsie, it's still a comedy, but it's a slightly more, well, we're going to nominate this one for Oscars type of comedy.
Sure.
Rather than your sex comedy Meatballs or things like that. So a slightly more highbrow comedy. But he also played Hunter S. Thompson in Where the Buffalo Roam in 1980.
Yeah, and what a great fit he is for Hunter S. Thompson.
Very great casting,
Yeah, perfect. No, really, really good film, and all based around that period where Thompson was probably at his peak as a writer and at his peak as a sort of personality, creating this sort of mythos around himself. Right in the middle of the whole sort of Fear and Loathing sort of era. And Murray is superb, or the next best thing to getting Thompson to playing himself, really.
And him on screen with people like Peter Boyle and Bruno Kirby, fairly good actors. But again, another raft of those comedy actors who do serious roles as well. I mean, Peter Boyle.
And that's a really good sort of ensemble cast, I think, because any uncertainty that Murray may have had about himself as a dramatic, serious actor, or doing something that wasn't Meatballs, or that wasn't trying to blow up gophers on a golf course, you've got Peter Boyle and actors of that caliber in there, and they are a real bolster for an actor like Murray. People that he could really sort of play off, and it shows in the film. The sort of the chemistry between the sort of leading players there really does pay off and really helps the film. And it's got this whole vibe. I think much more successful than the Gilliam Thompson movie with Johnny Depp. I like that a lot, but Where the Buffalo Roam really, really captures the spirit of what Thompson was all about.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a subtle difference between the counterculture and drugs culture in the two movies. I think Gilliam's leans way more on the drugs than Where the Buffalo Roam, I think. It's more the counterculture aspect of Hunter S. Thompson in Where the Buffalo Roam, I think.
I think so, yeah. The way Murray plays him, Thompson is believable as a journalist and a writer,
Yeah.
And it's not just all fueled by other substances. The key fuel seems to be the drive to have something to say and to get that down on paper, missed deadlines, albeit. I think he really sort of gets inside Thompson, and it's a great biopic, I think. And I can't think of anybody better to play that part.
So we move on to like 1984, which is a pivotal year for Bill
You could
Murray.
say that, yeah.
Obviously, it's the year Ghostbusters came out, 1984. But he's got 3 movies that he was released in 1984. And for me, they feel like potential alternative worlds where Bill Murray could have gone. So you've got Ghostbusters, where he becomes megastar, comic actor, big budget Hollywood star, which is what we're going to talk about generally afterwards. We've also got Nothing Lasts Forever.
Yeah.
Low budget, Saturday Night Live, smartly written indie film, 84 indie film. So it's like in that world of a Jim Jarmusch, Stranger Than Paradise, those kind of movies. Or actually probably more like Down by Law, which is very similar in that comedy, crime, indie world. And I think bits alongside that, in that you can see him going into that world earlier than he actually does. And then obviously the other one that we're going to briefly talk about is The Razor's Edge, which is a period costume.
Yeah.
A drama.
This seems to be a case of Murray suddenly finding himself with a little bit of clout in Hollywood. You know, he's had a few hits in previous years. He's built up a reputation in the film business as well as TV, and suddenly, and we're in the 80s here, where mad things were happening, and if you had a hit or became an overnight success or made a name for yourself, people were finding they could suddenly name their own ticket, name their own projects. And there's a sense of that with The Razor's Edge, of Bill sort of suggesting that, you know, let's spread my wings a little bit. Let's do something that's not Ghostbusters or not Stripes or not Meatballs, you know. And predictably, it was not a hit.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't, but it does have an avenue that Murray at that time wasn't putting all his eggs in one basket. He was like diversifying and thinking, well, what types of roles can I play? What types of career can I have in some ways?
Yeah, and now we know the career that he has had. It's very interesting looking back on the roots of that and how he's almost always done that. The stuff that he's doing in films today, the way he sort of plans and manipulates his own career, he's always done it. You know, right back to those early days, he's always had feet in different camps. And as you say, the 3 films in 84 really epitomise that.
Yeah, and sadly, potentially for the other filmmakers involved, only one of those films was a big hit and put him on the map. So Ghostbusters literally blew up, went around the world, was a massive mega success, and completely changed probably the types of movies that he did for the rest of the 80s, I would say. He didn't really, he didn't really do the types of stuff that we've been talking about already between 84 and 90.
No, he didn't sort of stretch himself so much. I think he got into this little niche by then, and it could well be that he'd done those 3 very different films in 84, and with Ghostbusters being the smash, you know, he sort of decided, right, that's my career path for the next few years, you know, and we'll see what comes, you know.
Well, that's what I thought had happened. So I did a little bit of reading about why it took 4 years between him filming Ghostbusters and him releasing his next bigger leading role in Scrooged in 88. So he'd done Little Shop of Horrors, small cameo, playing the Jack Nicholson torture victim role at the dentist.
Yes, yeah.
And he'd done a couple of odd cameos for it in a music video, and he'd done a cameo in She's Having a Baby, uncredited. So, you know, he wasn't doing anything for 4 years until Scrooge came out.
Yeah.
And apparently, I was reading that he moved to France because he was struggling with the amount of attention Ghostbusters brought. So he packed the whole family up and moved to France for 3-4 years, and was just coming back into the world of filmmaking for Scrooged, and then it kicked on to his second half of his career. That's an interesting. I find that really interesting and not surprising, knowing Bill Murray's career.
Not at all. No, you do get personalities like this in showbiz and entertainment every now and then. I suppose that the classic example is Kurt Cobain, who suddenly became an overnight success and hated it.
Yeah.
And Bill was sort of in that position where okay, he'd had hits with things like Stripes and stuff, but nothing like the mega success of Ghostbusters. I wonder if it came as a big surprise to him. I wonder if he wasn't quite expecting it to be so overwhelming,
Well, yeah, I'm not sure he expected the film to be as much of a hit as it was. I think Bill Murray seems to be the kind of guy who's always surprised when something's a massive hit. I mean, because he hated Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
He hated Groundhog Day, and that was a massive hit and a massive popular hit, and people loved that film. But he hated it, and he so much so he had a massive falling out with Harold Ramis over it, and didn't speak to him for 30 years. It's like,
damn, this film's too successful, Harold.
But he does feel a little bit like that. I think he's probably there's a level that he's comfortable with the film being so popular.
You can see that with both movies, because Ghostbusters was being talked up by Dan Aykroyd before it came out. In the couple of years as it was in development and being made, Aykroyd was talking to magazines and so on, and he was saying, oh yeah, this is going to be a bit like one of those old Bob Hope horror comedies in the 1930s and 40s, like The Ghost Breakers or Cat and the Canary or something. We're aiming for that sort of 1930s vibe. And then the film comes out and it's got 80s written all over it, and it's just what audiences wanted at the time. And it came out around the same time as Gremlins, the Joe Dante film. And bang, bang, within a couple of weeks of each other, we got these two mega fantasy movies that didn't have big stars in, but they made stars out of their casts. And Groundhog Day the same, on paper that sounds like a little nice independent type gentle fantasy movie that's probably going to do fairly well and find its cult audience, but you'd never have expected that to become a blockbuster. No. And so I can imagine that in both cases it might well have been a bit of a surprise how successful they were.
So what do we think, what does he bring to Ghostbusters then? Because the part was originally written, I mean, the original ideal cast for Ghostbusters for Dan Aykroyd was the three of them, and it was going to be Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi, and Eddie Murphy. That was the three. And obviously John Belushi dropped out on account of being dead. And Eddie Murphy, that went away, became too big a star at that point.
Yes.
Actually. He was on the back of
Ghostbusters.
Yeah. Too big for Ghostbusters, which is insane to think about now, but there you go. What do you think he brings to the role of Peter Venkman?
I'm in two minds about this, really, because I didn't take to the character when I first saw the film.
Right.
I didn't really know Murray's work all that well, apart from having seen the sort of early comedy films. We didn't know him from TV over here. And I found him, well, as I said, Dan Aykroyd had been sort of pitching this as being a sort of Bob Hope style movie. So I went into the film at Christmas '84, sort of expecting that. That was the first thing for me. I thought, oh, Dan's lied to us. This hasn't got that sort of 30s vibe at all. It's very brash and in your face and very 80s. And it took me a while to adjust to that. And then Murray comes on and he's doing his usual sort of acerbic, cynical, cold character. Or for me, that's how I sort of read it. And I thought, this really isn't a fit for this film. I'm not sure that I like this guy in being so prominent. Right. He'd be a good character in the film if he took a bit more of a back seat. I don't like the fact that he's up front and he's doing all the talking, And now I know a little more about Bill and I know more about his screen persona. Revisiting Ghostbusters, I think he's great in the film. I'm still not sure he's a good fit for it, but then millions and millions and millions of viewers who love it prove me wrong on that, because
I feel that his the acerbic, cynical, downplayed role, I guess, he's not you say it's like it's 80s on the screen, it's brash thing, and he's not that character. He's not the brash 80s lead character in this that the movie is. And I think maybe that downplaying works off the ridiculousness of the ghost, the ridiculousness of the whole premise really well. And I feel like almost if you had John Belushi in the role, playing it with his exuberant gusto that he would normally bring to those kind of roles, I'm not sure that would have worked either for me.
No, because he'd be bigger than the ghosts almost, which you don't really want. You want Mr. Stay Puffed and the slime ghost and everything. You want. Sorry. I'm going to stop you there, Daryl. The slime ghost.
Yeah. Slimer, come on.
Slimer, yes, yeah. You want them to be the sort of the big sort of highlights of the film. And I think Belushi would have taken something away from them. He'd have been doing comedy of the style that the special effects characters were doing, and you don't really want that. You want the humans more sort of rooted, and you want them working as a team. And I'm not sure we get that with Murray either, though. I think the three other guys work very well as sort of finely honed sort of team, and we sort of watch their development as they sort of go out on different missions and capture the ghosts and investigate what's happening and so on. And Bill seems to stand a little bit aloof from that for me, or did when I first saw the film. And again, that was something I couldn't quite take to. I wanted this to be the story of guys who were sort of fighting to make a name for themselves in a sort of hostile environment, and they were trying to convince people that ghosts exist. I wanted the story to be their sort of rise to fame and to look at their achievements and how they get everyone on their side and everyone believing them. And Bill's character sort of undercuts that a little by being.
I don't think that's the story, Daryl. I don't think that's the story, because I always
it isn't, but that's the story I sort of expected it to be, and that's why that first viewing slightly disappointed me. I was judging it on what it had failed to be in my eyes. So returning to it years later, I appreciate it much more, and I can see that Bill's performance is very good. I would still say that he sort of stands slightly outside of the movie, though, and I'm not sure that works for it.
Well, for me, I feel that he's not in traditional the audience viewpoint.
Sure,
he's not like in a lot of those movies. You get the guy on screen that is representing the audience and saying the things that the audience are thinking, whereas Bill's not really entirely that, but he does have those moments where he says the things the audience are thinking. Where like they're in the prison and they're going like, it's crazy ectoplasmic disaster, but it's going to be epic proportions. And then you look at Bill Murray and Bill goes, don't look at me. It's as if to say, I think these guys are crazy. So he plays that role, I think, in this movie, pushing against the enthusiasm. But what I think is really successful with Ghostbusters is they don't spend all the time of the movie convincing people that ghosts are real. And having to have the whole plot line where someone goes, ghosts aren't real, blah, blah, blah. And they got to say, they're just like, no, they are real, because look, there's one on screen.
Yeah.
We've seen it on screen. We know we're in a world where ghosts exist. Let's move on.
Yeah. I mean, it's time now to mention the 2016 Ghostbusters remake and Bill's little cameo in that, because, of course, he plays a paranormal debunker.
He does,
in his little 2-minute scene in the new Ghostbusters. So he's playing in the new movie precisely what you're saying isn't really present in the original. And it's a nice little 2-3 minute cameo for him, I think. He's playing a character called Martin Heiss, who's nothing to do with the original film. And he comes in, and the girls have got a ghost sort of captured in one of their little contraptions, and again, he's all typical Bill Murray, looking really cool with a great hat on, great suit on, almost Hunter S. Thompson like, and And he's saying, you're telling me you've got a ghost, show me. I don't believe it. So nice little cameo. And it's interesting that he plays that sort of role in the light of the comments that you've just made about the original film.
Yeah.
Where that may be a sort of missing element. And it's an element that I sort of wanted in the film.
I think what for me the set differences, I mean, I've discussed this many times with friends over Ghostbusters and the new Ghostbusters, which I actually quite enjoyed the new Ghostbusters.
Me too, yeah.
But what I feel was missing was the believability of the world. I didn't believe the world of the new Ghostbusters. It felt very much like a comedy film world. Whereas the Ghostbusters, the original Ghostbusters, it felt like that stuff was happening in New York in 1984.
People often say about Ghostbusters, the 84 original, that New York is almost like a character in the film. And I think as a setting, it's used really well, without it necessarily being, we're at the top of the Empire State Building, we're at the Twin Towers, we're on the Brooklyn Bridge. It doesn't use sort of recognizable landmarks like that. But what it uses is New York attitude, and it uses landmarks that will be known to New Yorkers, but maybe not necessarily to the rest of the world. And it does use it as a very real place. And I think that's always good for fantasy films like that. If you can root your story in a very recognizable setting, it enhances the thrill and the amazement of what's going on in the fantastical part of the story. So and again, Bill I suppose works in that he's almost the human equivalent of New York in that film, in that case, in that he's keeping it real, if you want to use that phrase. He's a very sort of human, a very typical, almost a typical New Yorker in that sense. He's reacting to all the events in the way that any guy from the Bronx would react to them.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's sort of grown on me over the years. So I appreciate more and more what he's doing the more I see the film. But I've still got my own problems with it. But as I say, who's right, me or however many $100 million at the box office,
Yeah, and the millions of adoring fans around the world, indeed listening to this podcast. But let's find out. You could be on that island yourself.
I've been there before. Yeah.
I think it's interesting. We talked about that. I was kind of saving the New York as a character. It was very much in Ghostbusters, but it was also quite a trend of the 1980s. It felt like the movies of the 1970s depicted New York as a squalid, scum-ridden, one day a real rain's going to come down and wipe the scum from the streets kind of place. Yeah. But in the 80s, it was very much like, this is where you can become a millionaire overnight. We've got high-rise buildings. We've got people in suits walking down the street. We've got taxi cabs being called. It was very much New York as a city of dreams.
Yeah, I think over the last 40 years, New York has really rebranded itself, and and it sort of started there, really. I think, you're right. You can trace it back to that point 40 years ago, just pre-Ghostbusters. Yeah.
Well, that leads me into Quick Change, which has a different view of New York. Definitely a character in that movie. A character that is actively working against our lead characters in that. Now, Quick Change, we've picked Quick Change out because it is the only movie that Bill Murray directed in his current career. Who knows, maybe he'll pluck one out of thin air in his mid-70s. But currently, up to this point, it's the only movie that he's directed. He co-directed
with co-directed, indeed. Yeah.
Co-directed with Howard Franklin, the co-writer of the film, and Howard Franklin went on to do The Public Eye with Joe Pesci. He worked again with Bill Murray on Larger Than Life, the giant elephant movie, and he also wrote the screenplay for another Murray vehicle, The Man Who Knew Too Little, late 90s. So again, those connections, and this is for me is a trend of Murray's career. He tends to work with people he knows. There's always some sort of connection between characters in his movies. And if he's doing this movie, why is he doing this movie? Oh, yeah, the guy who wrote the screenplay was the guy who wrote the screenplay for that movie or directed that movie, and he's working with Wes Anderson again, or he's working with Jim Jarmusch again, or he's working with the Farrelly brothers again. So there's always a connection from pretty much from the late 80s through to now. there's always an obvious reason why Bill Murray did this movie.
Yeah, he's not the kind of performer who makes 3 or 4 films a year, you know.
No.
And it's like he works when he wants to. As I said earlier on, he seems to have always had this exercised this control over his own career, and whether it's he feels safe around certain people, or whether he knows that the work is going to be of a certain quality, or most likely, I think it could be that he likes working with people where he knows he's going to be allowed to do what he wants to do, that he's going to be given a bit of freedom. And who better to give you freedom than your mates, you know, people you've been working with for years. Yeah. And every now and then, every 10 years or so, it seems he finds somebody new as well. He finds a Jim Jarmusch, or he finds a Wes Anderson, who sort of take the place of Ivan Reitman or Harold Ramis, and he can now work with them on a regular basis, and he feels comfortable with them. But yeah, Quick Change is a really, really nice little film, and the story had been filmed once before. It had been made as a Jean-Paul Belmondo movie only 5 years earlier, called Hold 'Em, which was based on the novel by Jay Cronley is called Quick Change. Yeah. And but Belmondo had filmed it, I think in Canada, as Hold Up. Same story, done I think more as a drama than the sort of comedy drama that it turns into here. But yeah, Quick Change sort of came out of nowhere, really. It's one of those movies that turned up at multiplexes as multiplexes were beginning to spring up. And it benefited from the fact that multiplex cinemas were emerging in Britain, because it was ideal as the sort of film that would play on like Screen 10 or something. You know, you'd go and see that if you couldn't get into whatever blockbuster had opened that week. And I think having got in to see Quick Change, having been disappointed at queuing up and not getting into your first or second choice, and you say, oh, we'll go and see this thing with Bill Murray, and instead it would be one of those movies that you'd come out of thinking, that was unexpectedly great. You know, that was something really special. You know, I think it's a lovely little film.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of it. It's one of my favourite of Murray's entire career, really. But I do love those densely plotted comedies like this, where it's like The Big Lebowski or something like that, where the plot is so dense that a lot of the comedy comes from the plot, you know, rather than...
The great thing about this story is it begins so simply. It's a simple story of a bank heist, but with odd twists. You know, I don't want to give too much away to anyone who hasn't seen it, although it's 30 years old now, so you ought to have seen it if you're interested. But yeah, it's a sort of bank heist with a twist, and then it's the story of the getaway, and it ought to be a simple story, and it works as a simple story up to a point. But then I mentioned that Jean-Paul Belmondo's Hold Up was made in 1985. Another film made that year was Martin Scorsese's After Hours. And I think After Hours has quite a bearing on this film, in that what we get is not the story of a bank heist and the story of the getaway. We get the story of how all of that begins to unravel, and how everything in the city, people, places, situations, events, all conspire against our gang as they try and make their way to safety. And of course, you've got stealing the show again, even stealing the show from Bill, I would argue. You've got Jason Robards as the sort of grizzled old world-weary detective who is going through every detective cliche in the book and knows he is, and hates himself for it. And that all becomes part of the character, you know. And he's on their trail, you know, and he's only a couple of steps behind. It's great. If you like heist movies, it's brilliant. If you like those sort of stories where the world seems to be conspiring against the lead characters, it's a great example of that. It's a really good comedy. Bill's on top form. You've got a great supporting cast. Randy Quaid, Gina Davis.
Yeah, Randy Quaid is really a standout in this. I didn't quite steal it from Bill Murray, but he's definitely veering towards that. And also, it kind of set the tone for his career for the next 3 or 4 years. You know, he played this role and was playing those kind of sort of like simple, slightly dumb, whiny kind of characters, for 2 or 3 years after that.
Usually, we've talked about Ghostbusters and we talked about some of his other big movies. We sort of skipped over Scrooge, where I think this happens as well. Bill's very much the focus and the star, and here he almost takes a back seat at times and lets the other performers sort of come through. And is that a consequence of him directing the film, and is it him sort of giving them a bit of leeway, or is it simply the fact that they're such a great cast?
I think it's a bit of both. I think once he takes the makeup off, and they get away, he becomes the straight guy in the movie.
Yeah.
He's the guy who things are happening to him. The comedy stuff is happening external to him and impacting on this guy who just needs to get to the airport.
It's almost like those characters have got to react to bizarre situations rather than them being the characters that are prompting the funny stuff. Yeah.
And obviously Randy Quaid plays into that as being an obstacle himself. So he gets to have some of the slightly more outrageous comedy bits, I guess.
It's a great ensemble cast. Bill working very well as part of an ensemble. Good director as well, I think. It's a shame that he's not done more. I gather the reason for this. They were looking for name directors to do this.
Yeah,
I think they approached Jonathan Demme, Ron Howard.
Yeah. Well, he approached Jonathan Demme. Jonathan Demme turned them down. He was doing something else, Silence of the Lambs, I believe. So, he wanted to do, you can do Silence of the Lambs, that'll get you an Oscar, or you can do Quick Change with Bill Murray. Oh, that's a tricky choice. Demme turned it around. Ron Howard turned it down. Apparently, Ron Howard turned it down, and he said the script's not funny enough.
Yeah.
And at which point, Bill Murray went, F you, and never spoke to him again.
Right.
Even now, he's still holding the grudge.
Yeah. I've also read that Howard read the script and he concluded, I don't know who the good guy is here.
Yeah.
I don't know who the audience are supposed to root for. That's why it's so great.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons is that they're trying to make New York the character, but a bad character. Like this city is going to the dogs. It's scum. This city, the amount of times all the characters, the cops, the robbers, all of them say this city, this goddamn city, this city is scum.
Yeah.
It's like all of them say it all the way through the film, and the film really lays that on thick. And I'm wondering whether I was done to say that actually there's only so much you can take before the reasonable person, the natural, sensible person would rob a bank and fly to Fiji. That's what everyone would do.
So in the terms that you were talking about a few minutes ago then, Adam, you're saying that Quick Change is the last movie of the 1970s.
I think it definitely goes. A lot of those 80s movies are all about New York, like Brewster's Millions, like Secret of My Success, even things like Wall Street, which is supposedly showing greed is bad, greed is good, and it's supposed to be negative. I don't think people watched it as that necessarily as a negative view of the city. I think it was like, that's where your dreams can go, that's where you can become a millionaire. Whereas Quick Change, it's all about this city is scum, this city is pushing its folks beyond, and
that then becomes the perfect backdrop for things to go wrong.
Absolutely,
itself sort of seems to be conspiring against them at times. Great little film. It sort of came out of nowhere, and it's such a shame that Bill hasn't felt the need to go back to directing. But then he didn't really want to direct this in the first place.
Well, it's funny, I read the interview about him, and the article from 1990 was like, Bill Murray embraces directing, and it's just like, and it shows Bill Murray saying like, it started a fire in me, it's going to be a passion, I can possibly direct. And then literally in the same sentence he goes like, but it was a real pain and it was a real hassle, so maybe a couple of years off before I go back to it again. And even in that interview in 1990, you thought he really didn't like directing at all. I think one of the quotes was like, the amount of power you get as a major star in a movie is quite a lot. You get more as a director, but the amount of work you have to do to get that little bit more power is ridiculous.
Yeah,
And these were promotional tours for the film, you know. So I'm not sure whether that was the best angle to take in promoting this movie.
but having found that out, he sort of decided I ain't going there again. Now, I mentioned that I think After Hours had a considerable influence on Quick Change. Let's link another Scorsese film with another Bill Murray film. Move on to What About Bob? Or, as I call it, Cape Fear the comedy. You know, it was made in the same year as Martin Scorsese's Cape Fear remake, and to me, essentially the same characters in the same sort of situation, psychiatrist and patient, one wanting to try and distance himself from the other, and the patient coming after him, you know. And I think What About Bob is another great little sleeper of a movie. You know, it's Frank Oz directing. It's Richard Dreyfuss, who was on a real sort of career comeback and a real career upsurge at that time. He'd done Always with Spielberg. He did this. What else was he doing around
Down Night in Beverly Hills? Stakeout. You know, so he had a few hits.
Yeah, the two Stakeout films. Yeah, so yeah, he'd really sort of made a comeback at this point, and he proved once again that, you know, years on from working with Spielberg, he could still carry a movie for someone who's an unconventional sort of leading man. You know, he can still carry a big budget, big Hollywood film, and they're here working with Frank Oz. And again, it's a fantastic little sleeper of a film, I think.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, in preparation for this podcast, I used to use What About Bob when I was teaching screenwriting, and I used to use the opening sequence of What About Bob as a way of concisely getting the characters on screen. With literally by the end of the opening credits, you know exactly who Bill Murray's character is and exactly who Richard Dreyfuss's characters are before the credits are over. You know, you've got Bill Murray up and down his apartment, panicking, doing the OCD, locking, opening, punching in, trying to weave the house, cloths, tissues on the handles of doors, all that kind of stuff. And you've got the arrogant Richard Dreyfuss in his office, his New York office, you know, overlooking the city with his brand new book on the shelf. You know, you think, okay, putting these, it's almost like, what do we need to do to make this film? Well, you just put those characters together.
You've done your visual shorthand. You've sort of told us who these guys are. Yeah. Now bang them together. Yeah. And do you know what? Rewatching some of Bill's films in a short space in preparation for today, it occurred to me that Stripes actually opens in quite a similar way in terms of the way it just sort of introduces us to the characters and gives us a little bit of information about them and then puts them all in the army. Yeah. You know, so, but it doesn't start as it's a military comedy that starts out as something else, you know, and What About Bob sort of goes down that same sort of route. You know, it really just it takes that little bit of time at the start to just let us know who these people are, what their background is, what their views are, and then bang, we see how they sort of relate to each other. And as I say, it's Cape Fear with laughs, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It wouldn't take much to tweak this into being a horror or a dark thriller or something like that.
It almost is a stalker film.
Yeah. Well, they definitely play on that. Definitely play on that in the film. You know, you think Bob's gone? Bob's not gone. He never goes. He's there. He's at the front door.
To the point where he almost becomes like a sort of supernatural character, you know. yeah. They just can't get rid of him, you know. He's almost haunting them. And I think the scene in the film that epitomizes that is for most of the first half of the movie, Dreyfuss has been talking about this book that he's written and how he's got morning TV coming to the house live to interview him. And he keeps dropping this into conversation all the way through the first half of the film. And it's interesting where they put that scene because it doesn't form the climax of the movie, as you suspect it might do. It appears about halfway through. And the camera crew all turn up at the holiday home where the family are living. And Murray's character takes over the interview. And in Dreyfuss's eyes, he ruins it and he destroys his career. In everybody else's eyes, it's a tremendous success. And Bill's character becomes this almost becomes this celebrity in his own right, and but because he's stolen Dreyfus's thunder, the world at large, the mass American TV audience included, now see this guy as something great, something wonderful. And all that does is make Dreyfus sort of seethe even more about him,
Well, it becomes the tipping point, doesn't it, where he starts to take affirmative action against Bob in the movie after that. Beforehand, it was all like, well, don't speak to him, don't do this, don't you? And after that, it was like, you go into the sanitarium, we're going to lock you up for a few hours.
Yeah.
He starts to make more.
That's the pivot, yeah. So it's perfectly placed in the middle of the film, I think, because it gives you that whole dynamic for the second half. And it's great how they sustain all this. I think that, again, it's a really tight script in that something that could have become meandering. If you've got a plot about a sort of stalker type character or somebody who just won't go away or is annoying you, there's only so many avenues that can go down. And really, it seems to be a pretty sort of one route sort of thing in most scenarios, most cases. But the skill of the script here is to keep it lively and keep it moving and keep it inventive and keep bringing these little changes and shifts into it. And I think the actors play off each other really well. I gather they didn't get on all that well on set.
Yeah, apparently they were like a bit like chalk and cheese and didn't get on, and they haven't collaborated since. So that probably says a lot. I mean, Bill Murray tends to come back with people, doesn't he? So, as
we've been saying, Bill loves working with guys that he gets on with. So I guess the opposite is true as well.
Yeah. Well, I think this is an interesting period for Bill Murray as well, because it was just before Groundhog Day, which is a big hit.
Yeah.
But almost after Groundhog Day, he actively went against that and moved away from comedy for a couple of years.
Yeah.
I mean,
maybe for the reasons we were talking about earlier, that maybe it was a reaction to the success of Groundhog Day. It was like, right, I'm gonna distance myself from. Everyone would have been expecting Groundhog Day 2 or similar sort of roles, similar sort of comedic parts, and it's like, no, I'm not going there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He did Mad Dog and Glory the same year, but then he did Ed Wood, a small role in Tim Burton's Ed Wood, a great movie. Yes. Surprised, it obviously didn't come back and work with Tim Burton again, but they seemed like they would have been a good fit.
He worked very well in the movie. He played the real life figure Bunny Breckenridge in the film. And from what you see on screen, he seemed to have a good sort of connection with Burton. And you can imagine him appearing in other Burton movies. He'd have been great in something like Mars Attacks, for instance. You can almost see him in that Jack Nicholson role in Mars Attacks. But strange that he didn't work with Tim again.
Yeah, no, and then he came back to comedy in a big way. I think he had 3 fairly silly comedies after this. Kingpin. We worked with the Farrelly brothers, who he worked again with in Dumb and Dumber 2, fairly recently. A little cameo in that, and Larger Than Life, which is directed by Howard Franklin, who co-directed Quick Change, and Space Jam, which apparently he did because he's a big basketball fan.
Yeah.
So again. No, the rhyme and reason for Bill Murray's reasons to do movies can be as flippant as like, I'm a big basketball fan, I want to be involved.
Well, that's him all over, really. As I say, he does what he wants to. What a way to live. That's how to do it.
Yeah. So mate, I guess after those big comedies, he started to move more into dramas, and he started to forge relationships with certain filmmakers that would continue on. So I'm thinking like Rushmore in 1998.
That's with Wes Anderson. He's worked in every Wes Anderson film since. He's been in everything. He's in the brand new one as well. So
I think maybe it's some sort of contract that Wes Anderson signed. You're going to be successful, but you have to include Bill Murray in every movie you make from now on.
Within that sphere, Bill will sometimes play Steve Zissou, and he'll have the title role and the main part. Or he'll do a little walk-on cameo, or he'll do something in between, or he'll be part of an ensemble cast. So even working for the same director, he will still sort of move around and switch around, and you never quite know what you're going to get. He might be on screen for 2 seconds. He might be the star of the film.
Yeah, I don't think it matters to him. This particularly at this point, I think there were certain films where he wanted to be the leading man, and then there's films he did because he wanted to work with Wes Anderson, and then he'd do the role that was right for the film.
Any particular favourites with Wes for you, Adam?
I'm a big Royal Tenenbaums fan.
Yeah.
But again, Bill's only in that a minor role in that.
Yes, he is.
Life Aquatic is great.
I love that.
Yeah,
I think
very silly.
It's almost like the more Bill Murray you get, the better I like the film. You know, for Wes, and Steve Zissou is my absolute favourite Anderson film, and a lot of that is down to the fact that it's got Bill in it. He really works for me in that movie, and I think his persona fits that character to a T. And the film's very inventive as well. I mean, the Bill isn't the whole story. He's the lead character and the title role, but he's also part of an ensemble. He just happens to be the sort of head of that ensemble, you know. But I think Anderson gives that film real life and verve and colour. It's got all these little quirky, unexpected moments, and you can never quite put a handle on what's going to happen in that film. You know, considering the starting point of it is let's make a movie about a sort of Jacques Cousteau type character, it then doesn't go in the direction that you're expecting it to.
Yeah, it was a particularly purple patch for Bill Murray, that 2003 to 2005 period, where he did Lost in Translation and started his work with Sofia Coppola, because he's worked with Sofia Coppola on a number of occasions as well.
Working with Anderson and with Jim Jarmusch as well. Got to mention there that Bill in Coffee and Cigarettes works with what may just about be Quad's favourite band, or one of Quad's very favourite artists, Wu-Tang Clan.
I don't know whether it's Quad's favourite artist. One of my favourite, certainly one of my favourite hip hop groups, definitely.
And what a bizarre little vignette it is as well.
But again, started that collaboration with Jim Jarmusch, and he's worked with Jim Jarmusch on a number of occasions since then, particularly in Broken Flowers, which I think is one of your faves, Daryl.
Yeah, I love it. Great to catch up with that again last week. It's interesting mentioning that in tandem with Coffee and Cigarettes, because Coffee and Cigarettes was sold as being a film made up of different shorts, whereas Broken Flowers is seen more as a sort of narrative film, but they actually work in the same way. Broken Flowers is very, very episodic, and it's the story of a guy who receives, having had just come out of a failed relationship, he receives a pink perfumed letter alleging that he may be the father of a boy who's now going to be like 19, 20 years old. And Bill doesn't want to do anything about it, but his next door neighbour decides to research it and send him off on a road trip. And so it becomes a road movie, and it then becomes a vignette movie, because what he does is Bill visits 4 different ex-girlfriends in turn to see if they are the person who sent him the letter. But he's not upfront about this. He doesn't sort of confront them and say, have you just written to me? He sort of skirts around it a little bit, trying to pick up clues, trying to pick up the vibe. And again, the cast is just astonishing, sensational. You know, you've got people like Jessica Lange in there, Frances Conroy, Tilda Swinton, Sharon Stone, you know, and they're playing the actors. And you know, what a stellar cast you've got there. And it's got this very, very enigmatic ending as well. I just think the whole thing works so beautifully. And Bill, again, as with some of his best roles, as with Hunter S. Thompson, as with Quick Change, as with Groundhog Day, I cannot think of a better actor to play this particular character. Very, very sort of curmudgeonly, doing everything almost against his will. You know, he's sort of sent out on the road. It's like the anti-road movie. You know, most road movies, the characters are out trying to find themselves. You know, they're searching for something. They're on a journey of sort of self-expression. This guy doesn't even want to be there. He's been told to be there by his next door neighbour, and you know, Bill is perfect for it. And again, it's got a lovely mixture of comedy, sentiment, and serious drama. I think it's perfectly pitched. And man, that ending is just great.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the cast there. We had John Hurt. So John Hurt was one of Quad's patrons, and when we had the Q&A with him, and we was talking about his appearances with Jim Jarmusch and things like Limits of Control, and you know, and we said, what was it like working with Jim Jarmusch? and he just said, if the phone rings and it's Jim Jarmusch, and then he just did the bowing down sign with his hands, I'll do it no matter what the role is. And that's Sir John Hurt, Oscar nominated. He could cherry pick whatever roles he wants in some cases, in many ways. And he was willing to do whatever.
That's the same with Bill, I think.
I think so, yeah.
With certain directors, Jarmusch being one of them,
Yeah, so we're not talking about Lost in Translation as much now, because that feels like a really pivotal key for Murray, where he'd done dramatic roles before, but this was the one that smashed it, the dramatic role.
Yeah. And I think without that, he may not have necessarily come to the attention of Wes Anderson, Jim Jarmusch, and some of the other people that he's worked with since. I think that showed us not a new side to Bill Murray, because we knew that he could do drama and get a little bit more serious. We've seen some of that, even in some of his comedy parts. And I think Coppola picked up on that for this movie, and I think other people have since taken that on, and it's defined what Bill Murray the actor is in the 21st century.
Yeah, I think it's definitely defined what audience thinks of him. I think his public perception of who Bill Murray is. He's no longer the guy from Ghostbusters, the guy from Kingpin.
It ain't Meatballs anymore. No,
exactly, yeah. They definitely redefined that. And it's a great movie. And he's great in it,
Yeah, a lot of his best films seem to be ones where either not very much happens, or in the case of something like Quick Change or What About Bob, you've got a very simple setup that then spirals into chaos. And we see how his character and the other characters around him have to react to that. And Lost in Translation, again, is a very sort of quiet, uneventful sort of film. But it's all in what's happening in the characters' minds, and the audience is being asked to do a lot of work here and to fill in a lot of the gaps. And if a filmmaker gets that right, it's perfect, and I think it really works in Lost in Translation. It's not a confusing film. I think we know all the way through what's going on, and we know what the characters are thinking, and we know what the situation is. But at its heart, there isn't really all that much actually happening there. So the joy of the film and the skill of the film is getting us to think about what the characters are thinking about. And I think Sofia Coppola does that brilliantly.
It's funny, we talked about Bill Murray being slightly on his own little island in films, like in the Ghostbusters. He's part of the Ghostbusters, but he doesn't feel like he's part of the team in the same way as the others are. And this fits that perfectly. He feels like a man on his own outside of the rest of the world in some ways.
Yeah. I mean, the word lost in the title is interesting because it's got multiple meanings, but that I think is the key one. And it applies to both of the lead characters. Not only are they in a foreign land, not only are they distanced from family, friends, or whatever, but I think they're floundering. They don't know what to do in their lives, and that's the loss for me in the title, is that they're looking for something and they don't quite know what it is, or if they'll recognize it when they find it.
Yeah.
It's such a difficult film to talk about, not in terms of giving plot away, but because there's so little conventional plot to it. It's all in the character, it's all in getting us, the audience, to react to what's going on in their minds, and when you describe it like that, it sounds so uncinematic and so potentially catastrophic in terms of entertainment value, but it just works so well. It's just a brilliant character study. And I think the characters are very well written. And again, as we've said about other Bill Murray films, I think the key here is we're given a lot of background early on. They sketch in a lot of detail about these characters, so we sort of get a handle on who these people are, and that then leads us to more of an understanding of where they might be going as the film's events transpire.
Yeah, and relies heavily on Bill Murray's natural cinematic charm, I guess, in that respect. Character, not charm. Yeah.
Another film where you try and think of another male actor in that part, and there wouldn't be anyone as good.
No, not at all. So we've galloped through most of his career here and there. I'm just looking at what he's got coming up, and again, we've been talking about this, the connections wise. He's got 3 films that have been completed, ready to come out. He's got 1 that's in post-production and 1 that's in pre-production. He's got a new Wes Anderson movie, The French Dispatch, which should have come out this year but has been pushed back. I will be pushed back. We've got the new Ghostbusters, which has been pushed back, again revisiting the role of Peter Venkman apparently. We've got On the Rocks, another collaboration with Sofia Coppola, so one to look out for next year. We've got The Now, a TV series by the Farrelly brothers, who he's worked with.
So again, it's all that safe ground then.
It's all those safe ground, those people he's worked with before. And you're just looking back over his career and you think, yeah, he doesn't do that many. He's never, even for someone who was as big as he was in the 80s, he never had those ones where we've got this film, we've developed it as a vehicle for Bill Murray kind of films. And Dan Aykroyd had a few of those. John Candy had those movies. He had those movies where we developed this as a vehicle for this star. And if that star can do it, we'll go to a different star who's a bit similar and moving on. Whereas Bill Murray never really had that. Never really, maybe it's because his on-screen persona is such a tricky thing to get around.
Yeah, well, we've talked about how he sort of stands aloof and apart from the rest of the movie in some of his projects, and he's almost got that sort of relationship with the entire film business. It's almost like he doesn't see himself as being a movie star. He's an actor who works with Wes Anderson and Jim Jarmusch. He works in these little bubbles, and he almost doesn't regard himself as being a conventional Hollywood star. It's every now and then a part will come up where he'll sort of be interested and say yes. Like he got the chance to play Franklin Delano Roosevelt in Roger Michel's movie Hyde Park on Hudson, and again, he's not worked with Michelle before or since, but there's a decent cast involved in that film, and it's a chance for Bill to, again, having played Hunter S. Thompson, it's a chance to play a real person. It's maybe he saw that as a chance to do something a little bit different, and the role appealed to him, and it's not simply an FDR biopic either. It's showing a peculiar sort of facet of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's personality, and maybe that was the hook for Murray to say, yeah, I'll do this. So every now and then you might get a director that can entice him into doing a role that he finds a particular interest. Other than that, has Wes Anderson left a message on the answer phone,
Well, we talk about answer phone, but that's one of the great stories of Bill Murray's career. He doesn't have an agent. He has a 1-800 number. Yeah. Everyone rings that number to get hold of him, whether it's like your bank manager or whether it's a new Hollywood deal,
Anyone would think he was trying to make it difficult or something.
It does feel that way, doesn't it? Yeah. Well, let's draw it to a close there then. Happy birthday, Bill Murray. If you're listening, obviously.
I can't believe he's 70, but...
No, it is fairly crazy, isn't it?
But then, like Groundhog Day, perhaps he's always been 70, like you say.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Daryl, and we will see you all at home fairly soon. Once again, I want to thank Quad and the BFI for supporting our podcast, and please do tell your friends, check out our Facebook group, and check out our website where we've got some extended show notes for these films, for all the films that we shamelessly name drop throughout these podcasts. You can check those out as well. Take care. See you soon.